The average radio listener listens for 18 minutes. The average Howard Stern fan listens for, are you ready for this? An hour and 20 minutes.
How can that be?
Answer most commonly given, I want to see what he'll say next.
All right, okay, fine. But what about the people who hate Stern?
Good point. The average Stern hater listens for 2.5 hours a day.
Look, but if they hate him, why do they listen?
Most common answer, I want to see what he'll say next.
Before he was the self-proclaimed king of all media, Howard Stern was just a kid with a dream of being a radio star. This week, we wonder about Howard Stern's laserdisc sales, if Tiny Tim went to the MTV Music Awards, and what's the funniest joke about pussy willows. We will also discuss alternate titles for the Star Wars movies before finding out if 1997's Private Parts stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says Gladiator with a glut, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Welcome to the Test of Time, and joining me for the 192nd consecutive time is my friend Alan Noah.
That's me. Welcome to the Test of Time podcast, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about private parts, specifically our genitals.
No, we're going to be talking about the Howard Stern biography, Private Parts, based on the biography by Howard Stern, Private Parts.
Oh, I am very unprepared then. I was prepared to talk about my genitals for an hour.
Well, I'm not going to stop you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to show you something. I thought this was a lot of fun. I saw someone write this on Reddit, and it opened up a big discussion about how the Star Wars movies are completely wrong. And if you rearrange the names in the proper sequence, the titles make so much more sense.
So it would be like Star Wars Episode 7, then Star Wars Episode 2, then Star Wars Episode 1, then Star Wars Episode 5?
No, rather the subtitles. So, for example, Episode 1 with this little boy that can go either way, Star Wars A New Hope. This is the prophesized boy that will bring balance to the Force. Episode 2, Rise of Skywalker. Episode 3, Attack of the Clones, which makes a lot more sense because there's the only movie when they do any attacking. I mean, there's a battle at the end of Episode 2.
A battle in which they attack.
I disagree. I think Episode 3. But Episode 4, The Force Awakens. Because it looked like the Jedi were dead and extinct. That's more The Force Awakens.
Well, but in Episode 4, Darth Vader and the Emperor are still using the Force. It's not like the Force has gone away.
I think The Force Awakens implies the good side of The Force Awakens. In this case.
Okay.
Episode 5, Revenge of the Sith. You know, The Empire Strikes Back, I think, is probably perfectly fine for that one. But in this one, Revenge of the Sith, because Darth Vader is now really kind of, they don't say the word Sith there, but he's really getting back at the Jedi, not just kind of the Empire versus the Rebels.
Okay.
And Episode 6, The Last Jedi, because he is the last Jedi. Once the Emperor and Darth Vader are dead,
also Yoda dies.
I mean, he's not the last Force-sensitive person, but he is the last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 7, The Empire Strikes Back. I think that's when the Empire strikes back.
No, there is no Empire in Episode 7. It's the First Order.
Yeah, exactly, which is completely different from the Empire.
Right.
And then Episode 8, if you look more at the storyline of what The Last Jedi was, Episode 8 is Return of the Jedi. Like, now there's going to be more. I thought that was kind of the point of it. And then Episode 9, The Phantom Menace.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of these work okay. I mean, I think the reason that this list exists in the first place is because the titles for the sequel trilogy aren't great. And I've talked about this before. It's a stupid thing to nitpick, and I realize that. But it annoys me that all three of the movies start with the word the. It annoys me that episode 8 is The Last Jedi when episode 6 was Return of the Jedi. All of the other movies have like a different Star Wars word, but then they had to reuse Jedi. Like that annoys me. And I realize those are nitpicky complaints, but I think because you had these 3 new movies where the titles were like, wait, what? That enables someone on Reddit to be like, well, what if we reordered them? And I mean, okay, I get it. I don't know. To me, you can't change episode 5 from The Empire Strikes Back because, of course you can. And I mean, I get it. It's just an exercise in playing with, the names and the stories and everything. But I think it really just comes from the fact that episode 7, 8, and 9 just had kind of bad titles. Actually, you know what? I'll change that. Episode 7, that one's good. And 9 would be a lot better if it was just Rise of Skywalker. If they lost that the at the beginning, that would make me so much happier. 8 isn't a great title, even though it's probably my favorite of those movies. But I digress. I can appreciate that as a good job internet thing.
Exactly. That's kind of what it was. I just thought it might be fun to share it. Well, talking about a very similar film to the Star Wars universe is, I guess, Howard Stern.
How so?
Fighting against the empire of the FCC.
He doesn't really fight against the FCC in this movie.
No, that could have been an entirely different film. This film is more about Howard Stern's rise through the ranks of radio, and he starts off as the obscure disc jockey, bouncing just from small little radio station to radio station. The movie talks about how he meets his wife, Allison, and discovers his true voice in radio. And he also meets a woman named Robin Quivers, who becomes his sidekick. And he finds his audience, defies the censors and his bosses, and becomes the most well-known radio personality in the world. And you're right, this is really more about his rise of his personal success and trying to overcome the bosses that really didn't want his stuff, rather than the government. And Howard Stern, he likes to call himself the king of all media, but there was a weekend in 1997 when Howard Stern really was the king of all media. He had the #1 radio show in the country. He had the #1 book on the New York Times bestseller list with Private Parts, or maybe it was Miss America. I'm not sure which one was #1 at that time. And he also had the #1 movie.
What about the #1 TV show?
He didn't get the EGOT of like all media, and also at the time there could have been a laserdiscs. He was not. I don't think he was the #1 laserdisc in the country.
Magazines?
No.
I mean, it's not really the king of all media, then, is he? He didn't say king of most media. Maybe he's the king of a good amount of media.
That's true. Did Michael Jackson say he was the king of all pop or king of pop?
King of pop.
Brilliant move by him. So the movie opened at #1 with $14 million, and it bumped a really fun film from #1, The Empire Strikes Back Special Edition.
Interesting.
And this movie opened March 7th, 1997, but Star Wars Special Edition, which opened in January, that was still at #5. And this was a time in my life when I had a good buddy who was the manager of the movie theater. He was our age, but he was just such a trustworthy guy. And all movies, they come on reels, or back then it did, on actual film reels. And you couldn't test them out on Friday when people pay for a film. You run through the entire film on Thursday night, like after the showings are done. So what he would do is he would always, he would stay late on Thursday night, and he would run all the new films. And what he would do is he would actually just open the doors and let some of us in. And you couldn't take any like candies or anything because they count that. But the stale popcorn at the end of the day, they got fresh popcorn every day. So they're like, you guys could take the rest of the popcorn. We would just all watch. We watched so many films that year. But this film I saw, and it wound up making $41 million domestic on a $28 million budget. So the film itself in theaters made a couple bucks, but wasn't a huge smash. But Howard Stern, had you ever listened to him?
So here's my story with Howard Stern. My dad loved Howard Stern. And I'm going to say loved because I don't think he really listens to him anymore. But he let us being my sister and I, listen to Howard Stern when we would visit him in California. And I never liked it. And I think, like, reflecting back on it, which I was doing after watching this movie, I think part of it was that there were just jokes that I didn't get. And I knew my dad got because, you know, he was laughing. And, you know, maybe it was just sex jokes or whatever it was. I didn't find it funny. And maybe that, like, bothered me. And so I, like, resented Howard Stern. Later, as I got older, I just never got into him. I've never really been a fan. You've played some interviews for me over the years. You're just like, oh, he interviewed Conan O'Brien. Let's listen to this interview. It's great. Okay, like, it's not like I hate him or despise him or anything like that, but I've just never been a big fan.
You know, I used to listen to him a little bit on K-Rock in New York when he was on 92.3, and that's where he recorded from. I do listen to him now on Sirius XM, and I really love his interviews. I think he's one of the greatest interviewers that ever lived. I really mean that. And to be honest, when he's doing his other bits with what they call the Whack Pack and all these eccentric characters that have developed over the years, that are real people that call in, I'm not as big a fan of all of that stuff. I usually honestly tune it out, but I will listen to almost any interview that he does because he's just so good.
I mean, I'm aware of that. You hear that, like, he gets people to open up in ways that, like, no one else does. People tell Howard Stern things that they don't say in any other interview. I know that that's one of his skills, but yeah, I don't really, like, seek out his interviews or really any of his stuff.
And, you know, the film opens with probably, I would say, the definition of absolutely ridiculous Howard Stern. And to the movie's credit, they know this is absolutely ridiculous and stupid. It's really what happened at the MTV Movie Awards or Video Music Awards, something like that. And he was trying to shop this film called Fart Man, based on this character. I think it might have been one of his radio characters, possibly. But, I mean, it would have been a 90-minute fart joke film. Mm-hmm. I mean, good thing he did not do it, because it just would have been probably one of the most notoriously bad films ever made. And definitely they would not have made this film, because this is a legitimate film. It's directed by Betty Thomas. She directed other hits. She directed the Brady Bunch movie. She directed 28 Days, which is not 28 Days Later. That was the Sandra Bullock film. I bet you've seen parts of this film. It turns out she directed Alvin and the Chipmunks, The Squeakquel.
No, I don't think I have. I think I've seen bits and pieces of The Road Chip, which I think was the third one, but I have not seen The Squeakquel.
That's fantastic. But this film definitely takes itself seriously in the matter that it's a serious film. But Fart Man is just being lowered down by the trapeze. And I've heard him talk about this. You know, he's worth now like $1 billion, and he almost died on this thing. Like, the wires almost like snapped his fingers. Don't you know, realistically, this probably could have been run by some 22-year-old, the rope, the lever that he was being lowered by?
No, I would think that would be like a union gig where you'd have to have like 40 years of experience. And I would think that the person who operated that rope did literally nothing else that entire night and like pocketed like a couple grand from just lowering the rope.
In 1993?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, you're in the TV biz, but he's talked about this, that it was just ridiculously dangerous what he was doing.
The shot after, as he's walking through like the backstage.
Oh, yeah. So we should talk about this.
I mean, it was a parade of cameos, and I'm sure I missed some, but I saw Flava Flav, MC Hammer, Tiny Tim, Blues Traveler, Ozzy Osbourne, Slash, Ted Nugent, Dee Snider. I mean, it was a ton of cameos, all just like right in a row. To me, I thought that was kind of interesting because obviously, Howard Stern's a famous media personality. He's got a lot of famous friends. He could probably pull strings and get a lot of cameos in his movie. But you might want to like parse them out throughout the movie, have Ozzy Osbourne in the beginning and then MC Hammer later or whatever. But no, they're just all there within like the first 2 minutes of the movie.
I mean, you can make an argument they should have had more cameos if you wanted, but the point was to show how insane was this hallway in 1993 or whatever the MTV backstage was. Like, I think there's a reason why I picked those people. I think all of those people were legitimately there that night. That's what I thought.
Some of them, yes. Flava Flav, MC Hammer, Blues Traveler, sure. I don't think Tiny Tim or Ted Nugent would have been there. I really don't think so. But I appreciated seeing all of those faces. I did not love the voiceover that starts the movie because, of course, I don't. It takes us back to his childhood. He's in Roosevelt, New York, which I believe they imply is like really far away from Manhattan. And he's talking about like commuting with his dad into the city, but it's in Queens. It's not that far from Manhattan.
Well, it is a very different area than it is today. I mean, you're right. Today, it's basically metropolitan New York City area.
Even back then, it was still one of the 5 boroughs.
Right. But he talks about it a lot, that a lot of people moved from his neighborhood in what the 60s, they call that white flight, when white people moved out of New York City into the suburbs. And he was one of the only white kids at his high school. I think he went to Roosevelt High School. And they skip over all that stuff. They don't really talk about it, but they do talk about how he's in Boston University, but he's being played by Howard Stern in this film. And Robin Quivers is played by Robin Quivers. And they do acknowledge that, yeah, he's probably like early 40s, something like that, when he films this. And he's like, yeah, just pretend I'm 18 here.
The exact line is, and I know because I wrote it down, I look a little old to be in college, but for this movie, you gotta suspend belief. So that is voiceover that is breaking the fourth wall.
That's true. But I think that works because this is before de-aging technology. You know, that's 100% what they would have done. They would have de-aged his face and he smokes a little marijuana in his upstairs bedroom. You know, that's what they would have done. But is it basically the only point of BU is that he's one of the Boston University DJs.
No, the point of that scene is that's where he meets Allison.
Oh, yes, of course.
The great love of his life. I am not a huge fan, but I do know that he and Allison divorced, I think early 2000s, so not too long after this movie came out, which is one of those things where you don't want it to color the movie, but you kind of can't help it because, you know, you just know that they don't last. And, you know, he right away is smitten with her and you don't really understand why she likes him. It's just one of those things that you just buy, like, okay, they're in love now. And she's going to follow him from job to job.
You don't get why she initially falls in love with him, but you do get like why she does love him because there is the Howard Stern character, the shock jock, and then there's the guy at home. They do make a good point of showing the difference between the two of them, and she loves that guy, and she really doesn't love the shock jock guy. But you're right, they don't show why this beautiful woman who's played by Mary McCormick.
She's one of the people that's in Howard Stern's inner circle who is not played by the actual person in this movie.
Which makes sense because she wasn't really on the radio show. Maybe she called in once or twice or something, but she wasn't like in on the gag, nothing like that. So it makes sense that she would not want to be part of the film.
Right. So early in his career, he has this one moment where he's supposed to be reading an ad and he can't find the copy. That's the industry term for the script. And so he just kind of improvises and he says, I went to the store back when I was a little kid and I loved it. And while he's just kind of rambling, he and his producer are looking for the paper and they finally find it. And he says, oh, the store has its grand opening this weekend. Oops, I guess you caught me in a lie. And I kind of chuckled at that. I was like, oh, that's pretty funny. He's doing something that he thinks is completely safe and he's going to get away with it. And he doesn't. I thought maybe he was like going to get fired over that, but he doesn't. It just sort of serves as a lesson, kind of, because Allison says that she really likes that moment because it was real and it was unscripted. So that seems to be like, you know, planting the seed of what his radio persona should be.
Yeah, and he's just progressing along as a small-time radio DJ, and he's interviewing this beautiful woman one night, and she, Howard, and Fred, the producer, also played by the real-life Fred Norris, and they all wind up back in like a hotel room, and they're all kind of hanging out in a bathtub when she kind of strips naked, and Howard's like, he's not technically doing anything, like he's not fooling around with her, but it's beyond what you should be doing when you're married. Al, you allowed to take baths with women rubbing their legs on you?
No, I mean, this is like the textbook definition of like a husband doing a really, really clearly shitty thing, but then saying, well, technically I didn't cheat.
It is different than having sex, but he's not innocent here.
No, and he knows he's doing something wrong, which is why he flees. So in the movie, it's an actress named Brittany Fairchild, who I was curious. I was like, wait, is that a real person? And I looked it up today. It's not. It's sort of a amalgamation of a couple of different women that Howard Stern had interviewed. I read somewhere that it was supposed to be Jessica Hahn, who I remember from listening to the tapes that my dad had, was a woman that he interviewed a lot. I don't know what Jessica Hahn's claim to fame was, other than being someone that Howard Stern talked to, or I think maybe she was like dating Sam Kinison too. But regardless, it's sort of like this manufactured story for the movie, but it also apparently did kind of sort of happen. And I believe in real life, Allison kicked Howard out after the incident. I think. I'm not positive about that.
Well, she does catch him, and she's pissed off at him. But in this film, he quickly grovels back to her. It's not the first woman he crawls back on his hands and knees trying to win back.
You're referring to Robin Quivers. We'll get to the part where he grovels to her later, but he meets her at this new radio station where he's in Washington, D.C., and Robin Quivers is the newswoman. She is not there to banter with Howard Stern at all. But Howard has had this epiphany where he decides he has to go all in, and that's the only way he's going to be successful in radio. He doesn't want to bounce from job to job to job like he's been doing. He wants to cut loose. And Allison's like, okay, if that's what you need to do. And he starts talking about his sex life or lack thereof. And he engages with Robin, who just kind of goes along for the ride. And this is sort of like the birth of the real Howard Stern that we know today.
Yeah, and it's very interesting you say that because have you ever seen the David Letterman show on Netflix, My Next Guest Needs No Introduction?
No, I have not seen that.
So he only interviews A-list of A-list. Like, it's like Barack Obama, and he interviewed Howard Stern, so he gets him for like an hour. And Howard talked about something unbelievable, something that incredibly stressed Howard out. He was obsessed with it. He had to be number one. But he said that with these Nielsen ratings, not only did your show get a rating, but there would be ratings of every 15 minutes. And he goes, I would look at him and go, why did I dip down in that 45-minute mark of the hour? So he used to say, I used to need to do something weird every single 10 minutes. My mind was crazy on this. And I understand, if I'm correct, that Robin Quivers, she was there part of I assume there's some FCC rule that, like, because it's a radio station, there must be news. That's the reason why the airwaves have free airwaves. They make rules like the emergency broadcast system, and certain parts have to be for charity, which is why, like, 5 a.m. on Sunday morning is like the charity stuff. And they have to do the news every day, several times a day. And I think that's what Robin's job is. Like, she's there because, like, even though it's a shock jock, they have to say the news like once an hour.
I didn't realize that.
I think that's what it was about.
Maybe. To the point about the ratings, I mean, I remember from my time in TV that, yeah, you would get like breakdowns of not just the episode, but where the ratings would dip within an episode. And you could, and people certainly did, look at it and be like, okay, in this block of the show, the ratings went down. So that must mean that people don't care about this story or whatever. And you can get pretty granular. You can also overanalyze it because maybe the ratings dip at 9 o'clock because people are getting to work and they turn off the radio.
Right. So he starts riffing with this newswoman. She's probably there to read word for word the script that she's given, which probably comes from Reuters or, some kind of news wire. And she's
Well,
just there.
there's probably a writer who writes it.
Possibly. Okay. And
Hopefully.
so he starts joking with her and starts talking about his sex life. And the show's starting to gain a lot of traction, and there is a scene, and this scene was, I think, the notorious, well, probably one of the few notorious scenes, actually. There's a woman that calls up and starts talking about how much she's into Howard and how attracted she is to him, and Howard Stern says, I'm going to have the first on-air sex over radio waves. She has a big speaker system. She has a subwoofer. He has her lay the speaker, the subwoofer, down flat on the floor, and she takes off her clothing, and she sort of straddles the subwoofer, and Howard Stern just kind of makes low bass noises, and this woman basically comes to orgasm from Howard Stern's vibrations. It's very, very funny.
First off, subwoofer, not subwoofer, although I do kind of like the way you say that. Second of all, I think the reason why this scene was popular at the time was because it's shocking. And obviously, Howard Stern's a shock jock. It totally is on brand. I don't know if this story is real or not. If it was, I'm sure no one knows what this woman looked like because she was a radio caller. But in the movie, of course, she's a gorgeous woman who strips naked.
They're purposely exaggerating that kind of thing because whenever there's a woman that calls up, he would also ask her about her boobs. And these women all seem to be, when they would call up, size 0 with 32 double Ds. I think everyone was playing this game with him. So he's doing all these things. He's pushing the envelope. But one day he goes a little bit too far because his wife, who was pregnant, and she winds up having a miscarriage. And while Howard Stern, the husband, is very sad, Howard Stern, the shock jock, makes some kind of joke. Yeah, we all flush the thing. And it's very lowbrow humor. And you could tell even Howard's kind of maybe he's a little disgusted he's going this low, but Allison's pissed off at him.
With very good cause. She is furious, and I completely understood where she was coming from. And there's one moment where you're supposed to empathize with Howard where while he's on the air and while he's making these jokes, there's this one little shot where he kind of looks down and he looks sad. And you're supposed to get it that this is his way of grieving and this is his way of working through it. But you certainly understand Allison's point of view of, fuck you, this is between you and I and not for the entire listening audience. And you get that. But for whatever reason, Allison sticks by him. She left him once before with the whole bathtub with the actress thing. She came back to him. She puts up with him now. And yeah, I gotta say, I didn't really get it. It's just the worst thing he could have done, I think.
It's pretty bad. I give the film a lot of credit. This is not an unauthorized biography. And say what you will about certain movie biopics, there's certain ones that show their warts, and certain ones that kind of show mostly good guys with a little bit of a problem,
Right.
And this credit, this is a pretty bad thing to show, and he's not supposed to be looked at in a good light from this. So I give it a lot of credit that they show that, and they didn't have to show that joke.
Right. Like I said earlier, watching this movie through the lens of, I know that they get divorced after, I watch a scene like that and I'm like, okay, maybe she had a reason. And maybe the divorce had absolutely nothing to do with that joke or anything to do with his on-air personality. I don't know, but it just sort of colors the watching of that scene.
It certainly does color the whole movie in another light.
Yeah.
But something about Allison is that she knew him when he was nothing and then becomes the world's biggest superstar, of not television, but of many, many forms of media.
I mean, he did have the E! show.
You know what? I wonder if he had like the number one cable show in the country.
I bet you he had the number one cable syndicated show between 11 and 11:30.
No. The Howard Stern show on E! was really big. It very well could have been number one in the ratings.
Well, in that time slot?
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, but the third act of this film is really when he comes to New York. And he goes to WNBC in New York.
I'm sorry, how did you say that?
Well, that's one of the great scenes. We meet the producer of the Howard Stern show, Kenny Rushton, who they call Pig Vomit, and it's played by Paul Giamatti. What a breakout role this was. I mean, for a breakout role, you want something that's really memorable, and this is quite a memorable role.
I mean, I guess I didn't see this movie in 97, so when I think of Paul Giamatti, I think of Sideways. It's certainly a memorable character name, Pig Vomit.
That's very interesting. Was Sideways your introduction to him?
I think so.
Wow.
He was in that movie with Malcolm in the Middle, Frankie
Big
Muniz.
Fat Liar.
Yes.
He was in My Best Friend's Wedding and Saving Private Ryan. He was in Truman Show. He was the control room director. That was a big one with him.
Right. And I remember we talked about him in My Best Friend's Wedding when he's like just the guy who works at the hotel.
I knew him from this film. So this was his breakout film for me. Did you get the idea that Howard was this uncontrollable guy and that NBC was, they didn't know what they had on this guy?
Well, yeah. I mean, they specifically say that. He's number one in DC. And so WNBC in New York hires him, and then they listen to him, and then they realize what he says and the kinds of bits that he does. And then they're screwed because, the boss at WNBC doesn't care for that kind of language. And we don't do that in New York City. So the boss fires everyone who hired Howard Stern. And then Pig Vomit's like, I'm going to control him. They compare him to Imus, Don Imus,
who Howard Stern hated. So that backstory's not really in the film, and they barely show Imus, but he hated Imus.
Speaking of, I remember my dad used to listen to Howard Stern. I remember my mom used to listen to Imus. Maybe that says something about their personalities. I know I didn't like either of them. As a kid, I didn't find either one to be entertaining. I mean, you can tell from the limited role Imus has in this movie that there's no love lost between Howard Stern and Imus.
No. So there's so many things they could have done with the Kenny character. And I think they picked really good little incidents. And what you were referring to before of what were the call signs of this radio station, the first thing is a real Cold War thing where he just brings Howard in. He goes, I'm going to tame this son of a bitch. Giamatti's got a great Southern drawl. All right, Howard, the first thing you got to learn is how to say the call letters. It's WNBC. And Howard, he either can't get it or he's purposely kind of fucking it up a little bit. But it's a great little bit.
I mean, I didn't listen to Howard Stern. Did Howard Stern on the air always say it like the way he does throughout this movie where he's kind of mocking it?
I don't remember. I mean, WNBC, I think, was the 80s. I only knew him from K-Rock, which was 92.3, from the top of the Howard Stern building.
I was just curious if that was a real thing that happened in real life.
Well, I will tell you that the WNBC was a real thing, and I found out why they emphasized it. Because when you say NBC and ABC, they kind of sound the same. WNBC, WABC. So they would say WNBC. That's the story behind that.
Oh, I mean, I guess they could just play the NBC tones. Do you know what letters that ding, ding, ding is?
No.
The notes are GEC, General Electric Company.
That's funny.
Fun fact from my time as a page. You get that for free. Didn't even have to pay for the tour.
So there's kind of just a lot of testing the censorship. This isn't really versus the FCC, but I think NBC substitutes for the FCC in this part, where he's really pushing the envelope of what he can say. And there's a great bit when they're basically saying, well, you can't say these words. You can't say certain words on television.
Well, it's the George Carlin bit of the 7 words you can't say.
Right. So they have this great bit where they go, all right, we're going to play the match game. They go, blank a doodle do. So they all say cock. I wrote a big cock, a big, huge cock. It's very funny.
Okay. I don't know that I found that very funny.
Oh, come on.
The willow one was a little funnier, where it's like, what kind of willow is it? I don't know, a pussy willow? Oh, yes, that's right. I got pussy too. And the joke is that they're saying the word that they're not supposed to say, but they're doing it in such a context that makes it okay. Ha ha ha.
Yes, it is funny. I'm sorry that you need such highbrow humor, Alan.
Wait, can I just interject with the joke that the pussy willow thing makes me think of?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a guy who's sitting on a porch somewhere, and he sees a little kid walk by, and he's holding some duct tape. And the old man says, hey kid, what are you doing with that duct tape? And the kid says, I'm going to catch some ducks. And the old man's like, you idiot, that's not what you use duct tape for. But a couple hours later, the kid comes walking back and he's holding all these ducks. And then the next day, the same kid goes walking by again and he's holding all this chicken wire. And the old man says, what are you going to do with all that chicken wire? And the kid says, I'm going to catch me some chickens. And the old man's like, that's not what chicken wire's for. But a couple hours later, the kid comes by and he's holding all these chickens. And then the next day, the little kid comes walking by and he's holding a whole bunch of pussy willows. And the old man says, hey, wait a minute. Let me get my coat.
Alan.
That to me is funnier. But why that scene is important plot-wise is because Pig Vomit is so furious that he fires Robin. And he has to fire Robin because he can't fire Howard. The whole thing is that if he fires Howard Stern, then he gets like a huge severance or whatever. So Pig Vomit's job basically is to try to get Howard Stern to quit. That way, it's his decision. NBC doesn't lose any money. They don't look bad. So firing Robin is actually pretty brilliant. That's a Machiavellian move.
He could have also tried to work with Howard Stern.
Right, but then he wouldn't be the villain. And since this is Howard Stern's version of the story, he's going to make the guy he calls Pig Vomit out to be a bad guy.
Yeah. It turns out his name really isn't Pig Vomit, because if it was, that would be just too bad.
It would be unfortunate.
Yeah. But he tries to mess with him as much as he can. So he replaces Robin with this, think of like a British Phil Hartman kind of like fatherly figure. And he's like, I am a Shakespearean trained actor. And he's like, yeah, how many times you get your dick sucked at the Royal Shakespeare Company? That kind of stuff. He's just messing with him. And this guy is totally grossed out, especially one day when there's a woman that deep throats a kielbasa. And he just quits basically right after that episode. He winds up being number 1 in all of New York, and basically NBC has no choice but to basically say, we will keep you and do whatever you want. So Howard goes on his hands and knees and he begs Robin to come back.
And she comes back. Then there's a big concert that he throws because he's number 1. I'm curious if this is real. Do you know if he held like this concert in Central Park with AC/DC?
I'm guessing it's real. It seems to be real enough. Right before this concert, when everything's going well for Howard, Pig Vomit comes to Howard's door and is like, hey, Howard, we're number 1, so let's work together now. And Howard's like, fuck you, and just slams the door in his face.
While this concert is going on, Allison, who got pregnant again after the miscarriage, goes into labor. They leave the concert. And then it sort of comes full circle where when the movie started after that Fart Man incident, Howard gets on a plane and he's sitting next to this beautiful woman in first class. And now we're back with him on that plane next to this woman. And even though she's beautiful, even though he like is daydreaming about her boobs, he talks to her about his wife, and then when he gets off the plane, he introduces the beautiful woman to his wife, and the voiceover kicks back on of like, well, I got my wife, and who needs other women, and I've learned my lesson or something or other, and that's the end of the movie. It's very abrupt. I wasn't expecting the movie to end there.
Well, it's just, where do you end the film? Once he achieves number one, do you go to him being number one at K-Rock? And I remember thinking the same thing. Why did it end abruptly in like 1985? But it kind of told the point that this movie wanted to talk about, just as his career success.
Yeah, I guess. But since it's the end of the movie, I guess I should ask you, do you think that Private Parts, the movie, not your genitals, stand the test of time?
That's so funny you ask. I was actually just about to ask you a very similarly worded question.
Oh, you want to ask me first?
No, you already asked me, so
Okay.
I guess I'll answer first. When I first saw this film with 15 guys at 12:30 Thursday or Friday at 12:30 a.m., I guess, it was unbelievable. Is this movie as funny as I remember it that first time? No. But a lot of comedies are like that, first of all. So I do not judge whether a film is as funny the first time I saw it as it is now. That's not fair. But surprisingly, I thought Howard Stern and Robin Quivers were very good in this film. I thought they acted well.
Considering that they're not actors.
Right. I think especially considering they're not actors, but even that, taking that into account, I thought they were good in the film. I think they wisely did not continue acting, but like Eminem doing one role, maybe he's only good at playing himself, and it's fictionalized 8 Mile, but I think it was a similar thing, that Eminem might not be a great actor. He was great in 8 Mile for that reason. And Howard Stern can play himself very well. I've probably seen this film 4 times maybe. I really noticed this time really how much they show him as a total asshole and a bad husband. I think when I first saw it, it was more like, Howard, you love Allison, but you can't do that. Now it's like, holy shit, like, you're lucky that Allison took you back. And I do like that they put that in there, because looking at biopics today, I think they are very, I'm not saying all of them. I mean, Rocket Man, I don't know if you saw Rocket Man.
I did not.
But it starts by saying, my name is Elton Houston, John, and I'm a cocaine addict, a sex addict, an alcoholic, something, this, that, and that's how it starts. And you know how Elton John's involved in this, so it doesn't paint him as, he's unflawed. So I like that they put the flaws in this. I thought all these sex jokes were funny. There is a great line, and this defines Howard Stern. And there's a part where they just don't understand why people are listening to this. And they're in the back room. It's pig vomit and another suit. And they go, one of the suits tells him it's a 3-hour show. The average Howard Stern fan listens for 94 minutes of his show. And why are they listening? Number one answer they give, I want to see what he's gonna say next. And he goes, ugh. And then the suit says, but wait, the average Howard Stern hater listens for an average of 2 hours and 38 minutes. And Paul Giamatti, like vein popping in his head, goes, but if they hate him, why do they listen to him? Number one reason given, I want to see what he's going to say next. And it's so satisfying. Paul Giamatti's comeuppance to me was really good. What didn't I like about it? It's not against the FCC, which is, I think, a much more interesting story of Howard Stern's. And I have to admit, having heard Howard and talks about the movie all the time, and I've blurred the lines of what was his story and what was the film. So watching it, it's not as fun as the FCC battle that I wished it was. Allison, you got to talk about it, that they got divorced. So this isn't a love story, because something great about it was, if he's such a pig, this woman is an angel. She stays with him. Probably the 3rd time I saw this, a couple of years ago. I was watching it with someone who'd never seen it, didn't really know anything about Howard Stern, and asked me halfway through the film, are they still together? And I lied, and I said, yeah, they're still together after this film. So I wasn't technically lying, because they were together after the film. Then they weren't. Then I later told her, because I did think it was going to ruin the film for her a little bit. That's what I didn't like about it. The whole of the AC/DC ending, it is abrupt. The last joke of the film was like a lesbian threesome action or something like that.
Yeah, because he's sitting next to the pretty woman on the plane, and he basically says, well, I introduced you to my wife. Maybe you'll come home later with us and we'll have a threesome. And he says that in front of his kids. And the woman rolls her eyes and his wife rolls her eyes. And it's like, oh, Howard.
Yeah, and that being said, I thought that the whole point of him telling the story, like in a Forrest Gump way, as a flashback, I thought that made sense as a voiceover. I know you don't like him. So to me, the film is not as fun as I remembered it back in 1997, but I think it still is fun. I think it helps that Howard Stern is still top of his game, number one. I think he's going to retire in a year or two. I don't think he's going to renew his contract. But if this was the rise of Joe Piscopo, I don't think it would be as much of an impact because he's not a big deal today. So for me, the film is still fun. And I'm going to say, yes, it does stand the test of time. What do you think, Al?
So when we were talking about the movie's abrupt ending, I think the reason it feels so abrupt is because it is abrupt, but that points to a bigger problem with the movie. What is the story of this movie? What is Howard Stern's arc in this movie? What lessons does he learn? What journey does he go on? And the answer to all of those questions is, it's a biopic where there really isn't a beginning and a middle and an end. It just is stuff that happened in his life. And I can guarantee you that at the time this movie came out, whether it was Howard or producers or the director or whoever was doing interviews about it, they said, well, at its heart, this movie is a love story. And it's really all about Howard and Allison, which, okay, that's sort of the framing device, but that's not what this movie's about. No one went to this movie to see, I want to know about Howard's marriage. No, people went to this movie to hear Howard Stern jokes and to see Howard Stern interviewing lesbians, and they figured there was probably going to be some nudity in there, which there was. Yay! But it's not really about his marriage, and that's shoehorned in, or I guess the rest of it is shoehorned around that. And to be honest, I don't buy their love story in this movie. Why they fall in love, I don't really get. Why she keeps coming back to him after the horrible things he says and does, I don't really understand. Separate and apart from Allison, I don't really understand his transformation from the doofy disc jockey to the Howard Stern, where he decides at like this rest stop or a gas station along the way when they're driving, he's like, I need to go all in and talk about my personal life. That's the only way I'm going to succeed in radio. And Allison says, okay, if that's what you have to do, I support you. And okay, so I get that she's a supportive wife, but how does he come to that realization? Because he messed up on an ad? That was a flub. Why does that mean he needs to talk about his personal life? He doesn't have an interesting personal life. His sex life is that he can't get laid from his wife. Okay. What else? He thinks he has a small dick. All right. It's not that interesting. And I gotta say, like, the bits that he does, even in this movie, there's one part where he does, like, he plays the role of a black traffic reporter who's, like, screaming into the microphone, I hate white people. Okay. Is that funny? I guess he thought it was funny, or people thought it was funny. I didn't think it was funny. I just don't appreciate that humor. It is exactly what you said. Why do people listen? Because they can't wait to see what he's going to say next. Okay, saying shocking things for the sake of shocking things, to me, isn't entertaining. Clearly, it's entertaining to a lot of people because Howard Stern is immensely popular and I'm in the minority opinion here, and I can live with that. That's all right. But separate and apart from the Howard Stern that we know, in this movie, I just don't find him interesting or relatable or a character that goes on any sort of a journey. Hell, you can have a biopic about a person I don't like, and it can still be a really interesting movie. Case in point, The Social Network. I'm not a big fan of Mark Zuckerberg. I don't like him as a person. I love that movie, though. That's a fascinating story about a person I don't like. This is not a fascinating story about a person I don't like. It's a pretty boring story. Also, everyone knows my opinion on voiceover. But this movie has voiceover. It has breaking the fourth wall. It has these weird interstitials with, who is that? Is that Stuttering John, Gary?
Yeah, Stuttering John.
Okay, where they're like, okay, so in this scene, you say, and this is where Howard goes to Washington, and you hold up this sign, and we're in front of the White House, and those bits, like, didn't do anything for me.
I believe that they might have been pranking this guy for like 2 years, that he was gonna be in this film and it was gonna be like his big break too. So I think it was a little bit of a joke that they were playing on him. I think that might have been it.
Okay. I just feel like they cram so many of those kind of like things in the movie. There's also the direct-to-camera confessionals that they do. There's just a lot of stuff in here that all feels really random, and it doesn't feel like a cohesive movie or a cohesive story at all to me. And I'm going to say that it does not stand the test of time.
I could see that. One last thing I'll say about Howard Stern I always found interesting was when he went to Sirius XM, which is, of course, out of the jurisdiction of the FCC, everyone thought he was going to have nothing but lesbian strippers, having sex with each other all over. And he said, I never did that. That was more of what I was always interested in him, the idea of that. But the actual jokes about it, I wasn't always that into them. But I like this film for the entertaining film it is. But I do see your flaws. I want to acknowledge those. I do see them.
You know what? Maybe this movie could have been a lot more interesting if it was about his battle with the FCC, or it was about how he really is a fantastic interviewer, or maybe not. Maybe that would have bogged the movie down and maybe that wouldn't have worked. I don't know. I think there's probably a way to tell a story about him that I could have found more interesting, but I didn't really enjoy this movie. Now that we're done talking about private parts, I guess we can get dressed again. I don't know if we needed to do this podcast naked.
You're not wearing pants?
No, I am wearing pants.
Okay, that makes two of us then.
Oh, good. So that's it for us this week. Next week, we're going to be talking about Tremors, the movie where Kevin Bacon fights underground snake monster things.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Except that also Michael Gross fights them.
This is very true.
And Fred Ward. And
Reba McEntire.
That's right.
So that's going to be an interesting episode. I'm really looking forward to watching that movie again. In the meantime, drop us an email at thetestoftimepodcast@gmail.com. Visit our website, testoftimepod.com, and talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at testoftimepod. Have a great one, James.
Have a great one, listeners.
Aw, that was very nice of you. Goodbye.
Bye.